You're watching in the studio at Davis Media Access, or at least the virtual pandemic studio version. Welcome, I'm Autumn Labbe-Renault. The recent uptick in violence against people of Asian and Pacific Islander, or API, descent, while of deep concern, is hardly new. Whether it was the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 or the Japanese internment camps of World War II, prejudice against people of Asian heritage is woven into the fabric of this country. Today, we're having a conversation about a number of things. What American fourth and fifth graders might actually be taught about these subjects. We'll discuss a growing call for ethnic studies, and specifically, we're going to talk about a project and curriculum called Red Altar. Joining me is retired teacher and racial justice activist Alexandra Lee-Jobe. Alexandra, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure. Let's start. Tell us a little bit about yourself. I know you live in Davis, you've been here for a while, and specifically your background as a teacher.
Well, I just retired, and before that I was a teacher for 40 plus years, and I've taught from preschool to fifth grade in San Francisco, Sacramento, and Davis.
Nice. So fourth and fifth graders often, they get these history units. What are they learning about, and specifically, what are they learning about API people and cultures? What's being taught in our schools?
Well, basically, unfortunately, very little, if any at all. Fourth grade history is the state of California, and often there's something called the Mission Project. My kids had to make a mission when they were in fourth grade. Fifth grade is United States history, which is the Constitution, 1776, and not much about Chinese Americans or Asian Americans.
Right. As we know, especially with the railroad in California, the Chinese workers the railroad wouldn't have happened without their work. Our director is going to be putting up some historical political cartoons for the time. And let's take a minute to tell us what we're seeing here. So this is a pesticide advertisement, but what's the image of?
Well, it's a hard image to look at, and it shows a Chinese man eating a rat, and the message is that Chinese people will clear out these pests.
And this next one, it's a little harder to see.
Yes, this one is Uncle Sam, and he's pushing the door closed, and the door says Scots Exclusion Act, which refers to the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which was the first racialized exclusion of any immigrants, and was specifically aimed toward Chinese people. And Uncle Sam's trying to keep them out.
And then this one?
This one is from a San Francisco paper, or maybe it was a flyer, a circular, and this man is punching a Chinese man. You can see the Q there, and his sign says Working Men's Procession, November 29th. So he's a working man, but the Chinese man is not, as depicted in this cartoon. Yes, and this is a supposed evolution from a monkey, and the fourth picture, if you go from left to right, second row, is supposedly a Chinese person, and the last picture is a pig. So the idea is Chinese people go from monkeys to pigs.
Those are hard images, but I appreciate you bringing them, because they, among other things, they really do underscore what I said earlier about this is not a new problem, the recent crop of API racism and violence we've seen. Alex, you reached out to me about doing this interview when you began working with a project. It's both a play and a curriculum called Red Altar. And you asked if I wanted to have a conversation about that. Let's start here because this centers around the concept of ethnic studies. What is ethnic studies and why is it important? And I want to say that there's been a big drive locally to have ethnic studies curriculum in our schools. I'm not sure if I think you've been involved with that, but let's start with that. What is ethnic studies?
Well, ethnic studies is the study of ethnic people. I mean, the term started in the 60s with this huge protest and riot at San Francisco State by African American, Mexican American or Chicano, Asian American, and Native American students who were upset because they did not see themselves anywhere in their college curriculum, in their education. And they wanted to see their history or our history, our famous people reflected in what they were learning in college. So that's actually where the term was born.
Mm-hmm. And why is it important for everyone? Why should we be pushing to have it in our schools?
Well, ethnic studies is American history. Truly, at the bottom line is it's American history, and it's a history of the people who built America, who the African American slaves who had so much to do with the economics of America, building America into a country that was wealthy, and the Chinese people who built the railroad and so many other things, the levees in the Sacramento Delta. And so, there's like numerous things. And the ethnic studies is American history. And it hopefully one day it won't be seen as separate from
Right.
American history, but it will be a part of American history because it is. It's just hasn't been told. It's been hidden. It's hidden from me. And when my kids went to the school here in Davis, was hidden from
Mm-hmm.
them. It's just not well known.
Right. Right. You let me know at one point that one of your sons had an experience that was kind of formative in guiding you, and I'm sure you have a lot of lived experience here too, towards becoming more involved in this work. Can you share that story?
Yes, well, it happened about 15 years ago. He was a junior at Davis High School and he was riding home on his bike. And this car of young white men drove by and they threw eggs at him and they hit his bike and they hit his leg with eggs and they said, "Go back home, you gook." And that's what they called him. And he came home and he told me about it. And I didn't know what to do. I felt horrible. No one should have to experience that. But I didn't know who to go to. I didn't know who to tell. And so we just kind of lived with it.
Hmm. Do you think things have changed in our community and in our schools since that time 15 years ago?
Yes and no. Yes, I mean, now I would certainly know to go to the police. I mean, hate crimes are more recognized now as
Yeah.
crimes, and people listen, and people. It's much better now, in one sense. But then there are still also teachers and adults when children can't come and tell them things that will say, "Oh, it's just a phase. Oh, they'll get over it. Oh, don't worry about it." And they don't bring it out, they don't lift it up. And when I taught, and these incidents happened between my students, I immediately reacted to it. I brought I brought the kids together. I heard each side of the story, and at times I would speak to parents, and I tried to teach the kid that was the bullier that these things are not okay. We don't speak
Yeah.
like that to other children.
Right.
And that's
Well,
that's the way I dealt with it.
yeah. So now you've gotten involved with this project called Red Altar, and it's through an organization called Ethnotech, and we're going to show their URL at the end of the show. We're going to talk a little bit more about them, but there is it's a play, and then there's also related work around curriculum. So let's start with the play because it tells a story that I certainly never learned about in school. And I believe we have a poster that our director can bring up too. There we go. It's a little hard to see here, but tell us about the story behind Red Altar, Alex.
Well, one of the members of our team, Nancy Wang, is a part of Ethnotech, and Ethnotech is a storytelling duo. And in fact, her husband Robert and I met here at UC Davis in Asian American Studies. We went to school together, and the story is of her ancestors. In the 1850s, 6 teenagers were aboard this ship. They were sailing from China to America, and they're trying to reach San Francisco. And as they were sailing up the coast, they had a shipwreck. There was a big storm, and their ship wrecked outside of Monterey Bay. And they were rescued by Rumsen Native Americans, Native California Americans. And they were rescued by them, taught how to live, how to fish, how to farm, how to survive. And from that, they began the fishing industry in Monterey Bay.
And
so Red Altar
is uncredited to this day, right?
Well, I believe there's a little bit, there is some credit given now in Monterey, but not in the history books.
Right. So Red Altar is both this kind of interactive theater presentation by the storytelling duo, but then in our email correspondence getting ready for this, there's also a curriculum unit that dovetails right in with the ethnic studies work we've been talking about. And can you share a little bit more info about that, please?
Yes, but I do want to say that there's a DVD of the play of Red Altar. And so it is available. But yes, I was invited to join this team of educators and storytellers to write 4th grade and 5th grade history curriculum. So we've written up a unit, and it includes the DVD, and we've written very user-friendly activities and that teachers can do with children on this topic.
Nice. And is it in our Davis schools, or is there work happening to help that happen?
Well, we haven't actually officially launched yet. So because of the pandemic, we're going to do a virtual launch, and it should be coming up soon in the next few months. And that's the way we're going to let it, people can buy it, they can stream it. And so we're working all this out, but it will be soon, and it will be available to all teachers.
Nice. I wanted to mention, and this will be a good time to pop up the website for Ethnotech because it's got a slightly unusual spelling. There we go. And in addition to I like how they describe it as kinetic storytelling. That gives you a hint that you're in for a lot of action and animated storytelling. And one of the organizers wanted me to share that they are always looking for partners in the education world, and that includes administrators, teachers, and so on, and support and getting this curriculum into more schools. So for people who are interested in following the development of ethnic studies curriculum, that would be an excellent resource. And before we wrap, Alex, I want to make sure there's nothing we left out that you didn't want to include. As you did say, DVDs are also available at the website, and you can get a lot more information there.
Well, I just wanted to say that The uptick in anti-Asian incidents is extremely upsetting, but I feel that the antidote to hatred and intolerance is education. And if every student in California, in Davis and California and the United States knew the history of every person that built the United States, there would be less hatred, intolerance, and these kinds of crimes would cease to exist. I really believe the answer comes from education.
Thank you. And that's a great note on which to end. And it, just to underscore what you said earlier, that ethnic studies, that is our American history. And I look forward to a time when that's being shared more widely in our public schools. So I want to thank you for joining us today. You've been learning about Red Altar, the theater project, and the education project with Alexandra Lee-Jobe. And I'm Autumn Labbe-Renault from Davis Media Access. Thanks for tuning in.